Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 62 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back Kerrie Searle, a dear friend and animal communicator based in Australia. Kerrie previously joined me for an inspiring introduction to animal communication in episode 11. And whilst on the surface, animal communication might be dismissed as more than a little woo-woo, Kerrie and I invite you to open your mind to really what the possibility of communication means when it isn't constrained by words. We are born into an energetic world that we are intrinsically connected to, but through our education system we are taught to only value verbal communication, and slowly we disconnect from the rich web of life and ourselves. It is through our humility as eternal students, and with the permission born from respect of these beautiful teachers who have stepped forward to support us, that we share this conversation as an invitation for you to return with us to the innate wisdom the world holds, to reconnect to not just other living beings in the world around us, but to the land, the ancestors, and perhaps more importantly, to all of the parts of ourselves. Disconnection and separation from ourselves and the natural world has been the key to establishing a society that is able to exploit and abuse both nature and other humans. Our hope is that this conversation stirs in you a remembering of the exciting potential that exists when you consider that communication with the greater world is possible. This changes the way you see the world and your place in it. Through this integrating shift, the potential of a new paradigm is born. This is so much more than communicating with animals. This is about listening to the knowing that is stirring in all of us and stepping into our true role in healing and caring for a reconnected world. Welcome back, Kerrie, to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you again. I realise it's almost I think it's a little bit over 2 years since we had our last conversation, which is quite shocking. It was episode 11 for anyone who wants to go back and touch base with that. But both Kerrie and I have been getting a little bit of a nudge from the animals that they clearly have other things that they want to share with us all at this time. So here we are, and just to get us started, I thought we'd just sort of touch on the basics of Kerrie's an animal communicator based out in Australia, and we just touch a little bit on the basics of language, because I think language is quite kind of constricting for us. Well, I find it myself. It doesn't really give us the sort of scope to really delve into these other areas of communication. And I know in our first episode you explained that you had been a teacher in a previous life,
in a previous life.
It feels like, but earlier in this life. And one of the things you said is like little children at school are taught very early on to use their words. That's how you communicate. And it kind of shuts us off as people from like all of this energy, because communication is really energy at its like center core. And we live in this amazing energetic world with all of these beings, whether they're animals, people as well, plants, everything around us is this vibrating field of energy, which we can communicate with. But because we have been sort of constrained by our education system to think that communication is only the words that we have, it kind of immediately puts this block in place. So when people think about communicating with animals, they think it's a bit woo-woo. You've perhaps lost the plot a little bit. But actually, I have a coach who talks a lot about like the frequency of a radio station, and we accept like a radio we can turn on and we can tune in to like any different station we want, whether it's, you know, in the UK, classic FM or a talk radio, and it's all there in the air. We can't see it, and then we just turn on our radio and we receive these signals. And I love that, and I thought actually that was a really apt way of looking at it, because it's the same with communicating with animals. Is like it's all there, but we just haven't tuned our radio station to listen to it.
Yeah, exactly. exactly. I think, in a nutshell, telepathic communication literally means feeling over a distance. So
Yeah.
it's not reliant on the verbal word. That's one of the most important things. And when you're talking about the language being constrictive, one thing I've found in doing this, I think roughly for about 20 years now, is words are energy. So it's not only what you say, it's how you say it. But with animals, what's quite extraordinary is humans are the only species that can say one thing but actually mean another.
Yeah.
Let's just call it, we can lie, we can be tricky, we can be manipulative. So what animals and very young children do is when a human speaks, yes, they hear our words, but what they're actually doing in that moment is tuning into what we're feeling and what we're thinking.
Yeah.
Now, you can't pretend a feeling. You can't pretend a thought, but you can pretend a word when you speak. So if our words don't match our intention or the energy, straight away the animal or the very young child will disregard the word and actually tune into what's going on in us. So you can't trick an animal. I sometimes have a client that will say, "Oh, I tell my dogs I'm going to take them for a walk later, but I don't." And I'm like, "How does that work for you?" Because they know. I'm like, because what we also don't, I think, really pay attention to is when we think, when we speak, when we are, it's like our mind is playing a movie. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about memories, there's a picture. So it's like a picture theatre in your brain where there are pictures. So part of the way to communicate with animals is, yes, you use your verbal word, but don't worry about getting the words right. Worry about the thought, the feeling, and what picture do you have in mind. If you're calling your dog and you want your dog to come, then picture your dog coming. Like I've worked with clients who I call my dog and they turn and look at me and run the other way. And I'm like, when I tune into the human, I'm like, but you're actually expecting them and seeing them run the other way. And they go, oh, yeah, I expect them to. And I'm like, well, you're saying one thing,
Yeah.
but you're actually
I'm
directing with your.
laughing out loud because we used to have a lovely Whippet cross Bedlington Terrier who was as fast as the wind and also liked to chase. She was a sight hound, so she'd go after things. And I've had numerous, hours of racing along behind her. And yeah, and I was just thinking, yeah, I was probably thinking let's run. And she was
Yes,
like, yeah, let's
yes,
run. So
yeah. Your intention, your energy's got to meet, what you're saying. You've got to, you have to mean what you say. And I guess having been not only a school teacher but a police officer,
yeah,
when I say something, I mean it. And, working with my 3 rescues, they know when I ask or, direct, they know I mean it and that I'll follow through if they don't.
yeah,
I think too, when you're talking about language being constrictive, often when I'm listening and tuning into animals, it's really, really hard to find an accurate English word
yeah,
to describe what they're saying. And often I will, like classic example, I was working with a horse in the UK and her human described her as a diva.
yeah,
And
yeah,
she shook her head and said, "No, I'm not a diva. I'm a princess."
yeah,
And her human he said, "Well, what difference does it make?" And I said, "Well, actually, when you tune into the energy of diva and you tune into the energy of the word princess, they're actually quite very different."
yeah,
And so sometimes it's really hard. And I'll often hear myself saying to humans, look, I'm trying to find the best word. Your animal's helping me, but the best one I can find is, because we do restrict ourselves.
yeah,
We really do. And sometimes with the feelings that come through, it's really hard to accurately describe them in a human English word. It's and so I encourage the humans that I work with, adults and children, to come back to the feeling, because yes, I get words, pictures, feelings, smells, and tastes, but not everybody gets all of those. So what I want to encourage people to do is don't restrict yourself thinking, oh, because I can't get all of them, don't do it at all.
Yeah.
You might get a feeling. You might get a picture. You might get a color. You might get a word. You might just, you might just know. And as you were really correctly describing, up until roughly the age of 7, when children go to school, they have a very balanced left and right side of the brain. They're still used to feeling and communicating with, like you say, flowers, plants, trees, animals, crystals, the water. It just comes naturally. But then when we go to school, everything's very left brain, very, your maths, your reading, your writing, and we become so left brain focused that we actually forget that there's a connection that we had when we were born, that everybody has when they're born, that we're actually losing connection to. And I think my story. It was healing the layers of trauma in me from many years of trauma that actually helped me reconnect to that feeling, knowing, intuitive part. And I just kept coming back to the feeling. As I came away from being numb and suppressed and disconnected, I could feel. So animals will communicate with you telepathically. They will send you a feeling all the time. And sometimes it's just sitting really quietly, but even just for 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, connecting in, because when I teach my workshops, what the workshops are about is, it's not getting a certificate at the end of the weekend going, oh, I can communicate with animals. I tend to attract people who have disconnected from themselves. And if you don't have a connection to yourself, how can you then have a connection to any other being? And so it's working through those layers of disconnection within yourself. And what you find is, over time, it just happens more naturally, more naturally, more naturally.
It's really interesting you say that. And I think, like, being a couple of years down my podcast journey, I was just listening to you and thinking, the question I normally ask my guests when they start is to share a bit about their nature story. And quite often they'll go back to like that early childhood and their connection to nature. And then life will often have happened to them. And then at some point they'll come back to that. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Like myself, for example, I never really disconnected. I think I sort of got deeper connection because nature was really a sanctuary for me and a lot of things that I was dealing with in life. And I think that's also why people tend to go back to it as well, because they do feel this sort of like, actually they have this deeper knowing that there is this ability to connect and sense the connections around them. And whether it's, like we were saying about language, whether there's a restriction around that, they're not really sort of feeling they're necessarily communicating, but there's certainly an energetic exchange that they're very much aware of when they're in nature, and they sort of return to that in their kind of, quite often in their hour of need, I think is quite a common situation. It's quite, sadly, is a common thread for when, as humans, we do reach out to these sort of alternatives that our society has classified them as, is really when we find that actually our ability to thrive in this society that we've constructed has come under
and
threat,
I think
as
what
it
you
were.
said, it was really important that two things that popped up. Firstly, I think we need to open our minds to the possibility of what the word communication means, because we get taught communication is the spoken word. But, I think we've all experienced that moment where we've looked at another person or looked at something and just had, like being flooded with emotions and feelings, that were really out of our control, whether it be, looking deeply into the eyes of another human or an animal or, whatever. That's communication. And we need to step away from the belief that, oh, I'm only communicating if I get words, because what's incredibly profound is when you can feel what another being can feel. And, I know there's a lot of people that are quite sometimes afraid of becoming, like the empath that takes on. Now, there's a really big difference between feeling what another is feeling, and then putting the boundary in place that goes, okay, I've got all that information, now I can let that go. Because that's what I do. Like during a consult, obviously I'm taking on and feeling what the human's feeling, what the animal's feeling. But then what I do is, okay, thank you, I've got all that information. And the animal goes, oh, okay, no worries. Animals are really good. Once they know they've been heard, they're really good. Whereas humans often lack very clear boundaries. We've all met the energy vampires, we've all met the energy suckers, but that's our job to put the really clear boundary in place. But there's nothing more, often I'm covered in goosebumps because the feeling that comes through is so strong and so clear. And then what happens is my left brain goes, oh, okay, I've now got to translate that into human words, because I've now got to then relay that with the spoken word to the human client that I'm working with. So I think if we can, why open our umbrella, widen our horizon to what does communication mean? It's not just the spoken word. And I think especially, nothing against the men that might be listening, but especially for women who have that, just that gut feeling, or that, oh, I just know, or I just get this feeling that you often hear, females, girls say, and I always say, trust it.
Yeah.
It won't always make sense to your left logical brain, because your left logical brain does not understand how it is that you just know something. And then what happens is your left brain goes into this, how did you know that? Did you read that somewhere? Did you hear that? Did somebody tell you? Have you heard that before? Did you already know that? Or is this new? And what I say to people in my workshops is, if you're engaging in a conversation, you're in your left brain, because our knowing and our intuition, it doesn't repeat itself. It doesn't yell. It doesn't have a conversation with you, and it is not attached to any outcome. It simply gives you the information. And then what happens in most of us is the left brain takes over and talks over the top of it. And by the time we're listening to the left brain, we've missed what our knowing and our intuition has relayed to us. So this isn't some woo-woo thing. This is how we're born. And children do that naturally until we teach them to detach from the right side and live in the left logical side. We've got to bring the two back into balance. That was the premise for my brain blend, was to rebalance the left and right sides of the brain.
Yeah, I think this is it's really important, and it's actually a lot of guests I've had, we've talked about like world views and also
Yeah.
the sort of depth of knowledge in the indigenous people, and
Yes.
they are, generally speaking, obviously we go through life generalizing, don't we? But
We do. Yes.
they maintain this connection to this,
Yes.
greater web of life that we're a part of. And
Yep.
they therefore have a very different approach to life. And I think this is how our society has been constructed, has been reliant on us disconnecting so that
Yes.
we can also, basically sort of abuse essentially, and
Yep.
the world around us. We can create this hierarchy of people. Obviously, there's a hierarchy within people as well, that
Yeah.
allows us to do
Yeah.
awful things to other people.
Yeah.
But there is this hierarchy where people at the top, and then animals and plants,
Mm.
and that allows us to basically to have this exploitive culture where we have literally just, taken and taken and taken from the world
Yeah.
around us in the
Yeah.
premise of progress, which is that lovely, lovely word. And
That's our excuse. Yes, that's the word
um,
we use to excuse our
and
behaviour.
it
Yes.
is, this is, whilst we're talking about communicating with animals, we're actually talking about learning to communicate with ourselves and
Yes.
just
Yes.
re-find our place in the world. And
Yep.
therefore, it's I mean, I think that's part of like why this is quite a foundational thing, is actually like, if you can start to think, actually, I can communicate with animals, they've got voices, they've got wisdom.
Yeah.
It's like you have to like change how you look at the world. And then if you change how you look at the world, then the world you live in changes, and that's how we're going to
Yes.
progress as a society
Yes.
is by, you know, taking these foundational steps of just going, actually, we're not, you know, let's not be constrained by the only
Yeah.
way we can communicate is as you and I are doing now. Um,
Yes.
but,
Yeah.
you know, there is this whole other world that is there. And we do know it's in, like you said, it's, you know, for women in particular, it's, you know, that intuition feeling, that inner voice that we're told to
Yeah.
disregard as well. We're taught to disregard that as well. We're taught to
Yeah.
not trust ourselves. And it's
Yeah.
about this coming back into balance, balancing the masculine and feminine, and,
Yes.
you know, coming back into this web of life and this place that we should be holding in this web of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really interesting when you were talking about, the Indigenous people. Something that I want to say to the people that listen to this podcast is, yes, I communicate with animals, but then what I didn't see coming many years ago was now goes way beyond animals. As you know, I'm a flower essence practitioner and I make my own flower essences. So, the plants, the trees, the flowers talk to me. But, I also too live on a property in Australia on the Mornington Peninsula that is part of the Bunurong people. And again, something that I'm actually, able to do is communicate with energies that are of deceased animals and humans. And there's an Indigenous elder who, centuries old, who every morning when I'm meditating, gives me direction and guides me on what to plant on my land, what Indigenous trees are needed, where they're to go. Calls me out if I'm not grounded, if I'm not connected. So, and it was the same when I went up to Gurri, formerly known as Fraser Island, and I'm going again to work with the whales this year. The Indigenous people there who, were just so prolific the last time I went there with a voice and with messages about how we are currently, the footprint, if you like, that we leave. And I'm in the middle of doing the article on it. But the footprint we leave, and I don't just mean the physical, but like you were saying, how we use the resources on the planet. Do we give back or do we just take? Are we aware of every step that we take has an impact on the planet, every action we make? And, it's the same with the animals where for so long they have been seen as lesser beings. And, very quickly, Ralph, one of my dogs, has reminded me just a couple of nights ago, I was out to dinner with a friend and my sister and her husband turned up, and my nephew who'd been overseas, I hadn't seen him, he'd only been home 2 days, and 5 minutes before my sister and her hubby turned up, Ralph said to me, "We're going to see Jack." That's my nephew. And I said, no, we're not seeing Jack, because I was with a friend and we'd been out paddling with the dogs in my little kayak. I said, no, we're not seeing Jack tonight. And he just looked at me and just didn't repeat it, just went, sure enough, 5 minutes later, up drives Jack. And Ralph turned and looked at me and gave me this look of total disdain that just went, told you.
Yeah.
And
when will
it
you learn?
Yeah, correct. And it was like years ago when I was working with the dolphins that had been rescued in Las Vegas from, the sea shows and all of that. And I remember doing yoga on the Friday morning, and I was leaving to fly home on the Sunday. And as I was leaving the tank, this one particular dolphin, who I now know as Cosmo, came up to the glass and said to me, "You'll be back." And I went, "No, in 2 darks, I'm actually flying home." So that when I went upstairs, I was asked by the people to come back the next day and work with the dolphins for the day. And as I walked into the area, this dolphin, Cosmo, jumped up onto the walkway, looked at me and said, "Told you you'd be back." I actually said, "How did you know?" And his response to me was, and I've never forgotten it, "How is it that you didn't know?" And it smacked me. I still get goosebumps. I just went, yeah. And I still have this really, right now, getting this big physical reaction of, good comeback. How did I not know?
Yeah.
How? So for people out there who, and I guess people who listen to your podcast aren't those, but, it's time for us to start realizing that there's wisdom in the animal kingdom, in the Indigenous world, in different cultures, that if we just open our minds, there's so much to learn and so much to learn from animals.
I think it's really important as well. I love what you said about your Indigenous elder and how
Yeah,
he's obviously seen in you a kindred spirit, and he's like kind of taken you under his wing, and he's like, well,
yeah,
you're
yep,
my best bet at the moment for like
yep,
seeing my land restored, as it were. Really, it's what he's
yes,
helping you do,
yes,
is like, managing it and caring for it in the way that he would want it to be cared for. And
yeah,
there's also, I mean, they've lost so much as well. Like,
oh,
that the
yeah,
ancestors that are there on the land, they've lost the connection with
yep,
the future generations. And they are open, it's not appropriation. It's like they need a voice as well. And
yeah,
they're willing to work with people who come with the right energy to help. We're all
yeah,
stewards of the land. We've got to look
absolutely,
beyond this sort of differentiation that humans we love of, you're a certain such and such and you're descended from this. And it's like, actually, we all have got to step up to this
yeah,
role, to
yes, we
steward
do,
going forward. And we have to do that in a way that is honoring. And I
yeah,
love the fact that, like what you said about how you listen and he gives you the benefit of his wisdom. And I
yeah,
think there's so much that we can learn from these cultures. And it's doing it with integrity and understanding that they have suffered
yeah,
tremendously.
yeah,
And we have to honor that as well, and
yeah,
hold the space for them to work through what they've
yes,
endured,
yeah,
and come as and when is the right time for them. And hopefully, we can work in partnership with them,
yeah,
for because the world needs it. um but it's just, I was thinking about, like, I mean, I don't know a huge amount about the Aboriginal culture, but I know they have like these lovely, like, the earth songs and the storylines and
yes,
things. And
yes,
it's like there's all of this wisdom that is in the earth as well, isn't there? It's beyond just
yeah,
the
yeah,
beings that are living, that you can go into your garden and you can see the trees
yeah,
and the plants, and obviously sort of birds and animals that are living and, sort of in their physicality in front of you. But actually there is this, depth of wisdom just
yeah,
in the earth as well that is available
yeah,
to us.
yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting when, when I was listening to you talk about again, the Indigenous people. Australian people may recognise this name, and I do have permission to speak. He is deceased. Bob Randall, who was one of the actual genuine landowners of Uluru, formerly known as Ezrock. What was extraordinary in this, when you were talking about sort of, instead of seeing us all as separate, we are all connected. And I remember when I was with the whales last time, Bob kept showing up, like, often was standing on my right shoulder. And it was him that, when I looked across it, because we're on a catamaran, we stay on the catamaran for the week on the water. And when I looked across at Gurry and just saw this line of, you know, energetic Indigenous men in their prime, really. And, there were no spoken words, but what Bob relayed in that moment with a nod to these men who nodded back, oh, here I go, I've got that strong
Yeah.
goosebumps, was that not just myself, but the other people on the boat were actually, when we did go onto the land, it was done with respect and it was done with permission from them. We asked permission first.
Yeah.
If we got into the water with the whales, we asked permission, because there are times when the answer is no.
Yeah.
No, don't get in the water today, we're mating, or don't get in the water today, we're playing. And nobody wants to be between two whales when they're mating, I can tell you right now. And, there are times when Indigenous people and they don't have to be in a physical body, who are performing ceremony, who are still, you're talking about the storylines and things like that. This is where, if we can connect to that, still keep connecting to these people, like I do with this Indigenous man, most mornings, I'm still getting that information that got lost.
Yeah.
And this is not something that I uniquely do myself. This is something that I really, really encourage people to just try. You don't have to sit for hours and hours. Just take 5 minutes to stop. You might even have a cup of tea, whatever it is, just stop and hopefully be in nature. And in that moment, witness the left brain who wants to have a chat with you. Okay, I hear you. But right now, I just want to go with what I'm feeling, because we've lost that ability to actually reconnect to ourselves, to that feeling. And, when I still, see and work with some Indigenous people who are still living, I watch their connection to the land. It just talks to them. It speaks to them. And it's just so natural that, it's not woo-woo. It's a feeling. And they'll describe, I can feel. And, the old historical Aboriginal groups lived on the land. No, they didn't wear shoes. It was like when I was in Africa with the gorillas, I didn't go with the population. I went with the Indigenous trackers. And that was extraordinary. It was like being with the Aborigines here, but it was the African Indigenous people and their knowledge and their wisdom, and what, for me to then actually see, in italics, Diane Fossey at her gravesite, and all these things that were happening, and to be amongst Indigenous men who could see what I could see was just, now I didn't speak their language. We didn't have to. We knew what we were feeling. There were tears, there were laughter, there were feelings, there were nods. And we had this whole level of communication without spoken word.
Yeah.
And so it is possible. Yeah.
I think something I've always found is obviously people might know my story is that I found myself in Africa at actually quite a young age. I was just
Yes.
barely 20. And to me, it felt like coming home. Like I literally it
Yes.
was a
Yes.
very deep, like I had such a familiar
Yes.
feeling with the land there. And it's something that I've never spoken with anyone before, but it's something that's sort of been playing in my mind is we know, that souls reincarnate, and yet we have this like very like rigid belief that, what we identify with what we are physically now.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if someone was to look at me, I'm a, white, very white,
Like me. Yes.
English person. And it's like, but then you're shutting yourself off from the fact that maybe that's not who you've always been. So equally, like, where we have segregated people, it's like maybe, the ancestors in Africa are actually my ancestors because
Mm-hmm.
maybe I was originally, an African in a
Mm-hmm.
previous incarnation, and that's why
Yes.
that
Yeah.
land and the wisdom in that land resonated so
Yep.
deeply with my soul. My soul was like, oh yeah, these are your sort of home grids, home sort of language kind of thing. And it's an interesting question, isn't it? Is of
Mm.
like, especially is there is a lot of this sort of idea of appropriation of culture and things
Yeah.
is actually, but we know, people are doing DNA tests and things, and you see like, actually like, most people are this massive melting pot, even, in the DNA. It's like which culture are you? You might not
Yeah.
be of the
Yeah.
culture that you resemble or the land that you're born on. And
Yeah.
it is interesting, but it comes back to again what you said, which was really key, which is about the permission, the
Yeah.
respect, treading lightly and, doing it
Yeah.
from a place that is to be has an intention to be of service. I think
Yeah.
that for me is really the key thing. Is it's like, I'm not here to sort of, big myself up, and
Yes. Yeah.
I'm here to be of service.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't matter what color my skin is,
No.
or how I appear,
No.
because I want to do what's right for that land and listen
Yeah.
to the wisdom it's got for me. But it is an interesting thing, isn't it, of
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. People talk about animals and humans as a separate thing. We're all animals. We're part of the Animalia species. And in fact, our DNA is 98% the same as gorillas. So, when you were talking about that, where there's not this disconnect, there's not this us and them, it's really opening that, an umbrella only works if you open it. It's a little bit like our minds, because what I've learned through this entire journey, being incredibly left-brained as a school teacher, incredibly left-brained as a police detective for 17 years, everything was, evidence-based. What I've learned is just be open to the possibility of new, different, amazing things showing up that will not make any sense to your logical brain. But like you, when you landed in Africa, as I have done in a number of countries, where you put your foot on the land and you go, I've been here before.
Yeah.
This is home. Now, your left logical brain goes, sorry, you're from England and that's where you're born, and your mum is this and your dad is this, and off it goes with a story. And you go, yeah, thank you, but this feels like home.
Yeah.
And the other thing you were talking about too is the integrity that comes with this work, if that's the word. And I don't just mean my work, but the work that we're doing. Whether you work in a shop, whether you fly an aeroplane, whether you're a brain surgeon, whether you talk to animals. One thing I've learned, especially working with animals, if I'm not in my integrity, they will not talk to me. So,
Yeah.
I can't, animals tell us, I've said this many a time, they tell us what we need to know, not what we want to know. And
Yeah.
sometimes those two things are very different. And animals know, as humans, we've got to speak to each other to sort of get a bit of a lay of the land. Oh, yeah, I've met this person. I just need to talk to them a bit to work. Animals know instantly, is that human in their integrity or not? Same with the Indigenous people. Is that person in their integrity? Am I going to work? Do I want to work with them?
Yeah.
The other thing that I think that I've also learnt, and like you were sort of alluding to, is for what here we go, restrictive word, but the best word I can find is be humble.
Yeah.
That I've really found I don't go into my work thinking, oh, I know it all. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know it all. There's not a day that goes by when I don't sit down, walk into my office to do this animal communication work or flower essence work, whatever it is I'm doing, that I don't go, gee, I wonder what I'll learn today. And I'm never disappointed. I'm always in utter awe of things, like Ralph the other night telling me that Jack was coming. No, he's not. He did. It's just, they're silly human.
Yeah.
How, so it's, I say to people, a starting point for, I guess, if you want to try and communicate, is if you have a friend or a partner, someone you really trust, where you can just sit and look into each other's eyes without speaking, start with a minute.
Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of people start to giggle and start to laugh. That's fine. But what I'm asking you to do in that time is just come into the feeling. You'll have your brain going, oh, look, I notice a freckle, or you've got a pimple, or you're going grey, but come into what you're feeling, because there's a communication between the energetic bodies going on there. And that's how I can communicate with, animals in other countries, humans in other countries, beings who are deceased, because you don't need to be in a physical body to be able to communicate with energy.
I think that's really important to just draw attention to there. I just want to like reiterate that. It's a practice. It's a
Yes.
skill. Like, you know, if you get off this call and you think, or get off listening to us and you think, oh, I'm going to go and talk to your dog or something, and you sort of like you march over to it and go, speak to me, kind of thing. And it doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't
No,
mean that you're not
no.
going to be able to do it. It just means
Yeah.
that, it's like anything, like you're learning a musical instrument or
Yes.
whatever,
Yes.
the first time you sit down at a piano, you're going to play some plinky plonky notes, but it's not going to sound good. And
No.
it's having, and that comes back to you saying about being humble as well.
Yeah.
It's having that, like, we do live in a society where we're conditioned, like, we've got to hack everything. If you can't learn to do something
Yeah.
in like 10 seconds, then it's not worth doing.
Yeah. Give
And
up.
it's not that. You're gonna have to sit with some discomfort. You're gonna have to sit
Yes.
with some failure. You're gonna have to,
Yep.
keep coming back, keep sitting in this place, keep trying. Sometimes, and it's not consistent either. You might like have this amazing experience where you get all of these messages and then you're like, yeah, I've got it. And then you come back the next time and you're like, crickets, there's nothing. I can't, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, was it just, and then, the voice in your head will take over and go, well, just made it up last time and it wasn't true, and you'll doubt yourself. But
That's
you've
a
got to
really
sit
important
with it.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really important point because even now, my left logical brain will not trust my knowing. And,
Yeah.
this is what I say to people. It's that subtle difference between the left side that's having a chat with you and the knowing. And it's really important, like I said before, re-listen to that bit where I said, your knowing only tells you once. It says to you, like Ralph, Jack's coming. He didn't repeat it. He didn't jump up and down. He didn't say it 20 times. And then he just walked off. And I went, what? So trust is a biggie because, like you say, what will happen is the logical brain will try and tell you that you are making it up.
Yeah.
Mine still does. I probably not a day goes by when I'm not at some time consulting with a client. And if it's someone who's interstate or overseas, and my left brain goes, you're not really talking to that horse in France, are you? And I hear it, but what I've learned to do is go, yeah, thank you, and just come back to
Yeah.
trusting because so many times when I just, even when I'm like making my blends, when I make the flower essences, I will have a particular tree or plant or flower that will say to me, put me in. And I go, logically, I go, oh no, because you're for this, 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 and this. And it just goes, put me in. So I've learnt now, put it in, and then inevitably down the track, something happens and I go, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
that's why you wanted to put me, you wanted to be put in. And I go, I'm so glad I trusted.
Yeah.
So it's because what we're not good at is stepping into the unknown. We do like to have all our ducks in a row and we like to know what's coming next and everything on schedule and what's going to happen. But can I tell you and encourage you, there is a whole new world when you're willing to step off the edge of that cliff into the unknown and go, you know what, I'm just going to try. Because our animals are really at the point now where they used to ask reasonably politely. Now it's got to the point where they're starting to, I almost want to, the best word I can find is like demand, because we've had long enough.
Yeah.
This isn't new. Animal communication is not new.
Yeah.
Communicating with other beings, trees, flowers, whatever it is, and, deceased people, whatever, this is not new.
Well, I mean, I often say, and often my guests say, it's a remembering. We're remembering these
Yes.
skills and things that, used to be common, and they've been filtered out of society for,
Yep.
reasons
Yep.
that you can find if you listen to other episodes in my podcast or you want to go and
Yes.
investigate that. That's a whole conversation, but they have been, deliberately
Yeah.
subverted from our experience of how we show up in the world. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm feeling like I need to share about the gorillas again.
Yeah.
So like when you were talking about the gorillas, so I obviously was also incredibly lucky to get to spend time with the gorillas in Africa.
Yeah.
And we had two amazing experiences with them that I'm not sure if I shared before. And one of them was actually the first group of gorillas that we trekked to see was in Rwanda. And
Mm.
at that time, it was the Susa group, and there was over 40 of them in this group. And we had quite a long trek to get up to them because they'd gone quite high up into
Mm.
their home on the mountain. And there were quite a few big silverbacks with them. And
Yeah.
actually, when we first started our interaction with the group, our hour with them, one of the big silverbacks saw the indigenous guys that were with us, like you had, and he took us down a little bit down the mountain, and there was actually a snare that was still set,
Wow.
and he basically showed
Yeah.
it to the
Yes.
trackers, and
Yes.
they were able to disarm it. So it was
Wow.
a tree, and then there was a rope and a snare
Yes.
that was set.
Yeah.
And so he was obviously fully aware of A, it was there, B, that it
What
was
it was.
something not
Mm.
good, and it was dangerous to both his family and also the
Yeah.
wider animal
Yeah.
kingdom. So he had the trackers actually disarm it. And then another occasion was actually the second time that we did a trek, and it was with another family group that was slightly smaller. I think there was about 25 of them, and they had been resting in this beautiful open glade and just lolling on their backs, and it was very peaceful. And then they'd got up and they were like, oh, we're going to start feeding, and they'd moved into this area of bamboo. And
Mm.
actually one of the silverbacks was not happy with how a few of the people in our group were behaving. And we actually have it on film, but I've never shared it with anyone. But he actually, it was because it was very intense in the moment, but actually when you watch the film, it was really interesting. So
Mm.
the the indigenous tracker was in the middle of a group of people, and I was on one side of him, and then there was two people on the other side, and this big silverback came charging towards us, and he very deliberately grabbed just the shirt of the tracker. And I mean,
Mm.
these animals, if you've not been
Oh.
in their presence, they're
When they
huge.
stand up, yeah,
And
it's like King
and there
Kong.
was a lot of energy came like right,
Mm-hmm.
and I was
Oh
right
yeah.
next to the tracker at the time, and it was like, and but it was when you see it, it was like he was so deliberate and so gentle. Like he literally grabbed the fabric of
Yeah.
the guy's sleeve and he sort of moved him, and it was a very deliberate like, just get your family in order, because he obviously
Yeah.
saw the people that the tracker brought with him were his
Yeah.
responsibility, and he was
Yeah.
like, you know, I'm talking to you. He didn't pick on any of the tourists. He could easily, like,
Mm.
there was four of us around. There was sort of a group of five of us,
Mm.
but he
Yeah.
specifically went to the tracker and he was like, just, giving you a little shake and just say, get your family in order
Yeah.
because they're not behaving as they should do. And it's really fascinating, isn't it, to like see this, like, just how aware they are and how they can, see like and realize actually, this greater concept of like they've seen him as the sort of silverback of his
Mm.
family group, and they're saying, no, you
Yes.
need to get your house in order. And
Yeah.
it's just,
And
yeah,
you know, it's that respect because we're in their home.
yeah,
That's we're talking before, what sort of footprint, what sort of impact are we making? When I was listening to you, it reminded me of an interaction I had. I was the only person in our group with the Indigenous trackers, and we, like right up the mountain, but we came across a silverback who was really funny. I was laughing because he led us in this circle, and I thought, oh, we're playing games here. We went around in circle, this really deep bush, and then he led us to a mum and a baby, and the baby was about 5 days old. It was still pink.
oh,
And mum actually patted the ground and asked me to come and sit, like, I've got it on film, it's beautiful, come and sit next to her. So I was just sitting, and this silverback's just sitting. watching, and it was just the most extraordinary. But then at that time, this other group came, and there was a very loud person, let's just leave it at that, who came sort of pushing through the bush and then walked right up to me. And Mum actually grabbed Baby and turned her back. And the silverback stood up, and this particular female got a bit worried. She walked away. The silverback placed himself between them and us, and then Mum turned back and sat with me with the baby. And I thought, again, here's a 5-day-old baby, and this person was really loud. The energy was very aggressive. It was very, she was yelling, carrying on, being really silly, really disrespectful. And again, it's that, if you had someone come into your home and behave like that, you'd be saying, leave.
Yeah.
But yet we have an expectation that...
It's an entitlement, isn't it? I think that's the word
Yes.
that was coming to me, was entitlement. Yeah.
Yeah, great word. I'm here, I paid my money, I'll do whatever I like. It's like, no. So it's that, no spoken word from any of the gorillas, but like you, the message was very clear. Like with the tracker, shaking the shirt, get your house in order.
Yeah.
This is my home. I'm not happy.
Yeah.
In that moment, just standing still and just allowing. And, like you say, when a silverback stands up, you're looking up, going, yeah, I've just seen a real version of King Kong here. Like, they are huge.
Yeah.
But yet they have such an extraordinary gentleness, like the whales, the humpback whales that we swim with. Yes, when you see them, breaching and slapping the waters, but they are so incredibly gentle. Could overturn a boat in an instant, but they don't.
It's a real contained energy, isn't it? It's really
animals are so present. Because they haven't got a shopping list, or I've got to be on Facebook or Insta, or I've got to be on the computer, I've got to be on the phone. They're here, they're now.
Yeah.
Like right here, right now. And that's what you can really learn from nature, from the animal kingdom, is what might show up if I connect to myself right here, right now. Because that's, I often say to clients, that's your homework.
Yeah. Your
homework is, and that was the basis for making my connection blend, because I was disconnected. I was a police officer, very disconnected to cope with. So I made that connection blend because I wanted to reconnect to myself. And in that process, I started reconnecting to, and not learning to, but reconnecting. It's like you said, remembering what it was like when I was little, and communicating with animals was just second nature. You watch a young child, they'll tell you if your dog's got an earache, a tummy ache, if they're happy, if they're sad, and they'll just tell you. They don't want a discussion about it, they'll tell you. My youngest niece, who is now 16, used to do it all the time with their dog. Mum, Mumu's got an earache. Mum, Mumu's got a tummy ache. My sister would look at me and go, how does she know? Because it is actually, that's the normal.
Yeah, and then we go back to the dolphin who says, how do you not know?
Correct.
And we go, yeah, Cosmo, that's it, exactly.
And that's what's great about your podcast and other podcasts out there. For those who feel like this is what they want to do, but they live in a world where this isn't normal, this is where you find your tribe. This is where you listen and go, oh, I'm not weird. I'm not woo-woo. This is actually the norm.
Yeah. Everyone else is weird.
Correct. Yeah. And so, if people do call me weird, I don't care. So I encourage people, and that's like I say, being on your podcast is great, having your podcast, because people who are not sure, who don't maybe not have anyone else that they can talk to this sort of thing about, you listen to these and you go, oh, there are other people out there like me.
Who are experiencing the world in a just completely different way. And I love what you said there is, you do work with flower essences, and you do create your own essence blends, both from the flowers and your lovely whale essence as well. And there is this is the other side of it, is the realization that there is so much support out there for
Oh,
us.
absolutely.
You know, from I mean, the plant kingdom in particular, I think, is actually really, really so supportive of us, isn't it? They
Oh,
give us
absolutely.
so
Yeah.
many tools from, you know, herbs and essence
Yeah.
fragrances and then the flower essences, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they provide us this like whole amazing toolbox of basically like
Yeah.
we've got you while you're trying to find your way back to where you should
Yes.
be. And
Yeah.
I actually kind of feel like I was sitting here thinking, we haven't really touched on the plants and the flower essences, and I know that we're sort of getting to an hour already, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to speak to you again, and I think
We'll have to do it again.
we'll
Yes.
have to
Chapter
do a
3.
plant. We're going to do a plant version of
All right.
this,
That
and
sounds
like
good. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
and deep diving a bit deeper into flower essences and the work that you
Yeah.
do with that,
Because that's
because
another world. Yeah.
it's very
Absolutely.
complementary as well, and it's very important to the
Yes.
work that you do. Is you you do communicate with people's animals, and you help generally when there's problems that have arisen that people are dealing with. And then, you know, you what I love about the work you do is you have these blends that you have poured your heart and soul into creating, that both some of the essences, and also you work with established essences
Yeah.
from various people who've gone before you and worked this craft and trade, and that, you know, that's also important, because sometimes like we get these messages and it's like, but what do we do with it? How do we move
Yeah.
forward?
Yes.
And that's what I love about how you've created your world and your approach to animal communication, is it doesn't just stop with hearing what they're dealing with. It carries on to, well,
Mm.
we can work through that together. It's, you know, it's that's not the end
Yes.
of the story. That's like we're starting a journey together rather
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Animals are very clear about what they need. Very, their physical bodies, their emotional bodies, quite often they will make a suggestion to me and I go, where did that come from? But I trust it and I pass it on to the human. And that's, I guess, I'm 62 now, so gathering all my life experiences and bringing all that, you know,
You're moving into your elder phase now.
I sort of feel like that. Yes, I
Yeah.
do. I really sort of feel like that all the years of all the different works that I've done and, all the journeys that I've been on, that, when an animal makes a suggestion or there's a thought or a feeling, it's like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah.
Animals are really good at listening to their bodies,
Yeah.
really good. If they've got an ache or a pain or an emotional upset or whatever it is. And like you say, the Indigenous people worked with the land and that's where it originally started, way before, for want of a better word, any white person came along
Yeah.
and did it. And that's what's got lost along the way. So that's, again, another very deep passion of mine, that I do listen to the Indigenous elder who, directs me at times. I listen to the trees, the plants, the flowers, because they have a wisdom that I can't learn from a book.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, it just doesn't exist. When a particular tree says, do this, or, when I made the seaberry salt bush, I wasn't even near the bush. I was walking with my dogs. It was at the time when my dad was actually dying, and the seaberry salt bush popped up and said, I'm all about resilience. And I went, that's nice. Why are you telling me? 2 days later, I'm making the seaberry salt bush blend. And I went, oh, so there's a wisdom. And when I sat down to make it, and it does, they take me months. Some of my blends take a very long time, because I tune into not just the plants and the flowers and the trees, but the trauma that that particular blend is going to be working with. So I've got generations and lifetimes and, cultures of trauma that are going, well, we need this and this needs this and we need to put that in. So it is a deep passion of mine. Like you say, that the two work together. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you're incredibly busy. So, you know, part of me is like, I don't want to burden you with more people, but if people have listened to this and they want to work with you and things, I will have the links to your website. And
That would be lovely. I always find space for them. Yeah.
and you still doing some of your workshops as well?
Yeah, I did stop for a little while. I've been working with my land here, been getting very clear direction. So in Australia, they'll start up after we're coming in, just starting to come into autumn, winter. They'll start up at the end of the year. And then I've started to get more people asking from interstate and overseas. So yeah, all the information's on my website. They can have a look there. But yeah, that's another passion of mine, helping people remember and reconnect. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I can speak from first-hand experience. I was trying to work it out, and I have a feeling it was probably about a decade ago.
I think so.
I
Yeah, I
actually
think it might be.
did your workshop. So it's
Yeah,
Kerrie's a very old friend, and I'm very grateful to her for sharing so generously. But that is who she is at her heart. She is the most beautiful, generous, humble, as you've seen. She is honest, and that's the sort of Australian influence in you. You just you tell it as it is.
yeah,
And probably from your years of working with the animals as well, just being very humble and being like, even with 20 years experience, you're like, I still like doubt myself. I still,
yeah, yeah,
think, oh my God, that can't be true. And yeah, I think it's just that's a beautiful gift to anyone who might be starting on this journey, because it's a dedication of your life, really. I think is
yeah,
we quite
yes,
often approach life thinking that we've got to rush to the destination, and we forget that it's actually a journey, and
yeah,
that's really the beauty of it. I
yeah,
kind of I could obviously speak to you forever, but I feel like we probably should be sort of wrapping up, and I just want to
sure.
give the animals a chance as well if they feel there's anything else that they want us to bring forth into the world at this time, or whether we've done them justice so far. We had no plans before this. We both sat here and were
No,
like,
yeah,
I don't know where this is going. And quite clearly, the Indigenous elders had their ideas, and they were like, we're
yeah,
not going to spoil the show for you. So, but if
yeah.
there's anything else, then obviously we'd love to hear from
I
them.
think I just I was just listening to them, and like the Indigenous people, the points they needed to make really strongly, they've made. Have respect for not just the land, but for the animals. Take the time to remember and reconnect, and come with some humility and humbleness, because you can learn so much from them. And this isn't how do I put this? It's not just something a willy-nilly, let's have some fun game thing. This is actually something that the animal kingdom is requiring from us as humans.
It's the next step in evolution, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. It's, like I said, they're no longer asking, they're very clear. It's like, excuse my language, get your shit together and start reconnecting,
Yeah.
because you can't hear us if you can't hear yourself. And they have a lot to say. They have a lot of wisdom to share.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
I sit here and I was stunned that I was like, how can it have been 2 years since we spoke before? And
Wow.
then
Yeah.
and I sit there and then I'm like, how is it 5 years since, the whole COVID pandemic world
Yes.
shutdown? And then it's like, no wonder the animals are getting a bit like, yeah, now's the
Yeah.
time. It's like you guys like, obviously they experience time differently, but like the clock is
Yes.
ticking, and
It is.
actually
Yeah.
stop putting it off. Stop
Yes.
making your logical brain exclusive excuses about it. Just
Yep.
it's time to slow down, remember and
Yes.
reconnect, and they are there to
Yep.
help us, and that's
Yep.
the real thing we need to remember.
Yeah. They're not a lesser being. They are an equal, and quite often
Superior.
more intelligent. Yeah. Yeah. Like I say, there's not a day that doesn't go by. Like, flabbergasted Monday night when Ralph said to me, Jack's coming. No, he's not. And like I said, I've been doing this 20 years. I
Yeah.
didn't know Jack was coming, but he did. So, in that moment, it's not about an ego that goes, oh, I should have. It was just going, yeah, I missed that.
Yeah.
Thanks for telling me. Like, there's so much. for me, it's an exciting world because there's so much unknown, so much to learn, so much to see. When you step into the world with the possibility of, and this isn't just about communicating with your animals that you have, walking in nature, a bird or a snake or a frog or whatever it is, they've all got incredible knowledge and wisdom. Just so there's a whole new world out there to explore.
Yeah, it is just amazing when you just open to the possibility. I mean, I've been lucky. I've got some of your whale essence that you made here, and I've got it here in the UK, and I always take it to when I go to the coast with me. But
yes,
I also had an amazing experience communicating with the whales around sort of the American coast when they had a lot of their hurricanes, and it's just amazing. Like there is that's the thing, and I love that you said you're excited about it because it is exciting. Like
yes,
it's this whole magical, amazing, awesome world that we get to live in, and just open to the possibility of like you haven't even scratched the surface. Like that's the reality of it. I mean, even after 20 years, it's like you haven't even scratched the surface. It's like for us, like our little beginners, we're like, there's just so much possibility and potential out there. And, this is how we're going to change the world.
Yeah, it's having that not childish, but childlike wonder. Yeah. You watch a young child when they see something new. Like when a child sees like a butterfly for the first time, or a fish, or a flower, or just watching them without any interference explore and the wonder, and so that's pretty much how I see the world, with that childlike wonder of wonder what I'm going to see today, or wonder what I'm going to learn today. It's that excitement and it is bringing my inner child to the surface to view the world in that way. It's remembering what I was like as a very young child before all of that got shut down.
Yeah.
So we can all do it.
I think that's the word that's coming to me right now is integration, and I think that's the other aspect of it, isn't it? It's like when you're talking about your younger self. And we just talked about you as like the elder as well, and it's like that's the thing. It's about integrating all of the parts of ourselves, and we've talked about this idea of separation, and it's about integrating everything that's around us. And it's exciting. It really is. And
it is. And the more of us that can find some time each day, like I say, even if it's 5 minutes, just to view the world from that childlike wonder and just go, wow, watching the rain on a leaf in the sunshine, after it's rained and the sun comes out, just seeing the spider webs when it's been raining, just all those.
And a rainbow. I mean, how amazing is a rainbow?
Yeah, a rainbow. Or, the other night there was a double rainbow. And like, my inner child was like, oh, that's a double rainbow, like just, and it was 30 seconds of wonderment. And so it's just, I guess, stepping out of the world as it is now and bringing the other parts, remembering those parts and, like you say, integrating and bringing them back. Because we're not just one part. I'm not just 62. I've been, conceived, I've been a baby, I've been a child, I've been a teenager, young adult, older adult, elder. All those parts are part of me.
Yeah.
I use all those parts when I work because I connect to all those parts and they've all got something to offer.
And that's been a big part of your journey, hasn't it? Has been basically being able to integrate all of those parts back together to heal the traumas and the layers that you've gone through. We can go on and on, and but I would encourage people to go back and listen to our previous episode, which was episode 11 as well, because it's very different. It had a very different feel. We covered a lot of very different ground, so you'll get another amazing hour of Kerrie's time and wisdom there as well.
You.
So, And yeah, I think we're going to have to come back and do a dedicated to the plants.
All right.
I think
that sounds good. Chapter 3 to come. Yes.
Yeah. But it's
Thanks
been
so
an
much for having me.
pleasure. Thank you so much, Kerrie.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Fee.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.